Masechet Gittin Daf Nun, the opening Mishnah of this fifth perek, mentioned that when a husband pays the ketuvah, he can use the lowest quality land, ziburit. That was the law of the Mishnah, mipnei tikun ha'olam, that will encourage husbands to enter into marriages in the first place, because they know, all right, if the marriage ends badly, or if he dies, then he will only have to pay from the lowest level land. On that statement, Mor Zutra qualified and said that lowest quality land payment, that's only if he dies and orphans are paying for the ketuvah. But if he's alive and they get divorced, then the husband has to pay benonit. That was his statement, and where we were challenging Mor Zutra from a number of challenges. We're in the middle of one of the challenges. We went on a tangent. The tangent was about two different types of guarantors, and so that's what we're just going to finish up, talking about the differences between those two types of guarantors, and then we're going to come back with one final blow to the limitation of Mor Zutra. So here we go. Itmar, arev dichtuva divrei hakol lo mishta'abed. Kabelan de ba'al chob divrei hakol mishta'abed. And arev is a regular guarantor, and so he has a lower level of responsibility than a kablan. Kablan says, I take upon myself to pay no matter what. Even if the borrower has funds, but the borrower says, you know what, I want my, let's say it's the father is the kablan, I'm going to take from my father's property to pay you, so he agrees to that. So kablan is taking upon himself more responsibility. So if you have an arev who has more limited responsibility, guarantor only steps in to pay if the borrower cannot pay at all. And if it's in the case of a ketubah, which we're going to see in a second, a ketubah, people agree to be a guarantor for a ketubah, sometimes even if they don't mean it, because they just want to encourage the couple to get married. And they're not so worried that they're going to actually have to pay it. So if you have this lower level responsible type of guarantor, in a lower level case where people don't always take full responsibility, everyone would agree that in that case, the guarantor is not actually responsible. He never thought seriously that he's going to have to take responsibility there. On the other hand, if you have the high responsibility person in the high responsibility case, that's the kablan who takes himself full responsibility to pay the loan, even if the borrower has money. And we're talking about a regular loan, not a ketubah, but a loan where, listen, the lender gave money out, and now would be at a loss if he can't get his money back. So this is a serious thing, and he's really expecting to get paid back. Unlike a ketuvah, where the wife never paid something so that she would have to get that money back. The ketuvah is, in a way, more like a gift. In that it's one way, she's not getting back her money, she's just getting a payout at the end of the loan. So in the case of a loan where the person actually gave money and is expecting to take it back, and it's not a case of a mitzvah where someone would say, oh, I'll guarantee the loan, just so that you have a business deal. It's not like a ketuvah where it's a mitzvah, where someone would say that. So in this case, everyone would agree that the guarantor, the kablan, is fully responsible because he takes upon himself more responsibility, and it's a case where people generally would accept full responsibility. So those two are the extreme cases. Our question is about the in-between case. Arev de ba'al chov kablan de ketubah pelige. If you have the lower level guarantor, regular guarantor, but in a loan where people are serious, or if you have a kablan who's more generally responsible, but it's in the case of ketuvah where guarantors aren't always serious, that's where we have a machloket. Some say in these cases also the guarantor, both types of guarantors, do really take upon themselves responsibility, even if the husband or borrower don't have any property. Nevertheless, that guarantor says, I know he has no property, but I fully would make myself responsible. That's one side of it. But there's a machloket about this on the other side. Some say if the husband or borrower have funds, have property, that's when it's more likely that the guarantor really means it. Because he says, listen, I know the guy has property. He's probably going to pay. In the off chance that something happens and he loses his property and can't pay, okay, I'll step in. So we expect that people are more serious about their commitment to step in if the guy has some property. But if he has no property, let's say the husband has no property at all, and then the guarantor comes and says, oh, I'll guarantee him. Well, most people in their right mind wouldn't guarantee in that case. Because it's like almost for sure that he's going to have to pay. So in that case, it's more likely he's just saying it, but doesn't mean that he's like, oh, don't worry, he'll pay. Just get married, right? I'll take care of it. But it's not likely that he really meant to fully indebt himself, the guarantor, and so he's not responsible. That's the question, and we are going to jump to the answer. And in all the cases, in those two in-between cases as well, even if the guarantor, even if the husband or borrower does not have any property himself, nevertheless, the guarantors, both types of guarantors, if they say they're going to guarantee the loan, then they do in fact guarantee the loan. The only case where it would not be is in the two lower level things. The lower level regular guarantor in a ketubah case, which people tend to take less seriously as guarantors. In that case, even if the husband has money, even if he has money, nevertheless the guarantor, we assume, didn't really mean it. Why? For two reasons. Number one, he's doing a mitzvah. This couple, they're not sure if they want to get married. Does he want to? Does she want to? And so he's coming in, and part of the reason why they might be hesitating is because, well, is he really going to pay the ketubah? So the other guy comes and says, oh, listen, I'll pay the ketubah. Just get married. But his intention is to help them do the mitzvah. His intention isn't really to obligate himself. Furthermore, it doesn't lose out anything. You see, in the case of a loan, where I say, oh, I'll guarantee the loan. So you know what? I tell the lender, I'll guarantee it. So now the lender is going to give the borrower $1,000 based on my guarantee. If I'm not serious about it, now the lender is out $1,000. So in that case, it's very serious. We're going to take that guarantee more seriously. Hey, you got to pay it back. In the case of a wife, where she didn't pay money to get into the marriage, as she's just receiving money at the end of the marriage, and so therefore it's not good if she deserves and should collect her ketuvah. But if for some reason the husband cannot pay, then the guarantor, it's less important for the guarantor to be on the hook for that, because then she just comes out with zero. She started with nothing, she ends with nothing, but she didn't lose out on any money that she gave up front. And so for those two reasons, a guarantor on a ketuvah, we assume, is not always fully in earnest that he's actually making himself responsible. All right, now we go all the way back to the question of Mor Zutra, and we had a number of challenges against him. We deflected all those challenges, but now we're going to have one final deflection against him. Mor Zutra again said that when a husband pays a ketuvah, he has to pay benonit. And the Mishnah was only talking about when orphans pay, that it's ziburit. Amar Ravina, Tashma meikara de takantin. Ravina says, I'm going to bring a proof from the origin, the reason for the takana in the first place, which was, we saw in a braita, Yoter mima sheish roseh lisa isha rosa linaseh visa kadatech miyatmeh hay mishum deyatmehu tiyubta demor zutra tiyubta. We saw the braita said that a woman wants to get married more than a man wants to get married. It's more important for her for financial reasons, emotional reasons, whatever the reasons. And therefore, we want to make it easier for the man to enter marriage. So we tell him, listen, you know what? If the marriage ends, you will only have to pay ziburit, lowest level land. So that was the reason for the takana. Now, Mor Zutra, if you should think that this Mishnah and this takana is only for orphans who pay, wait a second, that orphans would pay ziburit anyway, because orphans always pay from the lowest level land. That's a separate law. So you wouldn't have to make a takana for orphans. Rather, the takana is not when the orphan pays. The point of the takana is when the husband pays. And that's, so we tell the husband, listen, even if you pay, if you die and your children pay, they're going to have to pay ziburit. Fine. Even if they get divorced and you have to pay, don't worry, you'll only have to pay ziburit. So then he'll say, all right, fine, I'll get married. And that will help women who really want to enter marriage even more. And this is a final refutation of the opinion of Mor Zutra. All right, now Mor Zutra has more things to say. Amar Mor Zutra bered Rav Nachman. Mishemed Rav Nachman, he says in the name of his father, Rav Nachman. Shtan chov hayosel yatomim, afa pi shekatuv bo shevach, eno gove el amin haziburit. You have a loan document that comes as a claim against the funds of the orphans. So the father had some document and then owed some money, and now the orphans have to pay this document. So we saw the Mishnah says that they always pay ziburit. But now there's another limitation, actually an expansion. Even if in the document it said that there's enhancement, that says in the document that the lender will be able to collect from the best land. It says it right in the loan document, right? That's part of the stipulation. I collect from the best. See, in general, a loan we said is benonit. But here, in this case, the lender said, if you don't pay this loan, I'm going to collect from your best land. It says that. Nevertheless, if the guy died and now his sons are paying the loan, the law of that orphans pay ziburit overrides the clause in the loan document that says he has to pay from idit. That's Mor Zutra's chidush. We fully protect orphans. They always have to pay only ziburit, even if it says otherwise in the loan document. Okay, now that's Rav Nachman's opinion. Abaye is going to agree with him. Rava is going to disagree with the first two. Amar Abaye teda, debal chob dineh bebenonit umiyatmeh beziburit. Abaye said, right, this is the case. This is the halacha because after all, in general, a creditor, someone who's paying back a loan, gets paid back from middle quality land, and from orphans if it's always inferior land. If you can't collect even intermediate quality land from orphans, all the more so you can't collect superior quality land. In other words, he's saying orphans, the general law for all loans is benonit, and yet we say for if it's orphans paying, they pay ziburit, right? So you see that the law of orphans overrides the normal law of paying loans, which is benonit. Therefore, it makes sense that the law of orphans to pay ziburit will also override a particular clause in a loan document that says they have to pay idit. So Abaye agrees with and supports Rav Nachman. However, Rava disagrees. Amar le Rava, hachi hashta? Are you comparing are these two things comparable? Baal chob dineh midoraita beziburit kideula. So Rava says you always have to look at the origin of a law and why something is like it. His basic claim is going to be that for orphans, it's not really a new takana that we're making for orphans that they pay ziburit, but actually that is the status quo original deoraita law. So look how it works. The Doraita law is that a borrower, if he can't pay, can give his lowest quality land in order to pay back the loan. And that's what Ula said, Kide Ula, Damar Ula. Devar Torah Baal Chob Beziburit, Nemar Bachus Tamod, Va'ish Vegomer, Madar Kol She'ish Leotzi, Pachot Shebakelim. We can learn this from the Torah because it says if you go and the person didn't pay and you have to take a pledge, if the lender comes and takes a pledge from the borrower, he's not allowed to go inside his house and take, but rather you have to wait till the borrower gets something from his house and brings it out. Now, if the borrower is going to pick something from his house, what's he going to take? His most expensive flat screen TV? No, he's going to take some small cheap item, some kind of used vase. So therefore you see that as a pledge a person can use a low quality item. And so we see in the Torah itself when a borrower doesn't have money to pay, he can pay with lowest quality land. That's the Deoraita law. So, if that's the Doraita law, how come the rabbis made a takana? This is one of the items in our Mishnah, mipnei tikun ha'olam. Ma tamamnu ba'alcho bebenonit, kedei shelo tin'od delet bifnei lovin, ve'gabei yatmeh okmuha rabanan ad deoraita. The rabbi said, well, we want to make loans more available. And if a lender knows that, hey, if you default on the loan, I'm gonna get your swampland, forget it. I'm not gonna give you a loan in the first place because I don't want to collect your swampland. Even though it's a big swampland and they're monetarily equivalent, still it's still something that he doesn't want. And then people won't be willing to give loans. So the rabbi saw that this was a problem, so they made a takana. If you don't pay, then lenders can take from benonit, from mid-quality land. So that's the reason why that's a takana in the first place. When it comes to yetomim, then the rabbi said, you know what? Well, for Yetomim, we'll roll back the takana and go to the original deoraita law, which is ziburit. So that explains why Yetomim only have to pay ziburit. That's actually their original deoraita law. Now, what does this apply? How does this apply to our case, where it says in the loan document idit, if there's a specific stipulation in a promissory note that says you're going to pay with your best land, then that would be the deoraita law. The deoraita law recognizes the rights of a contract, and therefore on the deoraita level you have to pay idit. So basically, according to Rava, the takana on behalf of orphans isn't that orphans always pay ziburit. Rather, the takana is that orphans always revert to the deoraita law. In most cases, the original deoraita law of loans is ziburit, but in this case, the deoraita law would be idit, and therefore the orphans also have to pay idit. That's Rava's very, very interesting legal reasoning. It's quite sophisticated, but it makes a lot of sense. All right, now we're going to challenge Rava. Ul Rava, v'hataneh Avram Hoza'a, en nifra'in min nechsei yetomim, ela min haziburit, v'afilu hen nizakin, v'nizakin dinan medoraita be'idit. We have a challenge to Rava from the following beraita that was taught by a man named Avram Hoza'a, interesting name. He said that we do not collect from the property of orphans. When we collect, we only collect from the lowest quality land, even in a case of damages. Wait a second. Regarding damages, the deoraita law of damages is that you have to pay from the best land. We're assuming, like Rabbi Akiva, that it's the best land of the mazik. And so, according to your logic, the orphan should have to, as you said, orphans always revert to the deoraita law. Well, the deoraita law is idit, but according to this beraita, the orphans only pay ziburit, even in damages. So, it doesn't make sense. This is a proof for the first two opinions, that orphans always pay ziburit. That's the law, that's the takana of the rabbis. Orphans always pay ziburit, no matter what. Then this makes sense. But according to you, the orphan should pay the deoraita amount. That's idit in this case. So we answer on behalf of Rava. Hacha b'maiskinan kegon shaita idit nizak keziburit demazik v'Rabbi Yishmael hi te'amar b'deoraita b'dignizak shaminan u'pnei tikun ha'olam takinu rabanan b'demazik v'gabei yatmeh okbu rabanan ad deoraita. So we could answer that this beraita of Avram Hoza'a actually is following the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And we're talking about a case where the best land of the nizak is equivalent to the lowest level land of the mazik. And therefore, on the deoraita level, I have to pay the nizak. That's true. But the nizak would be the best land of the nizak, which is actually the ziburit of the mazik. So that's, according to the Bishmael, it goes by the best land of the nizak. So fine. So I'm going to pay only the lowest land, ziburit. So the deoraita law in this case would be that the mazik has to pay his lowest level land. However, because of Tikkun HaOlam, according to the Ishmael, the rabbi said, you know what? We follow the mazik. The mazik has to give his best land. That's fine if it's a regular person, if it's the father himself, or a regular person who was the mazik. But if it's Yatomim, then we revert to the Doraita law. What's the Doraita law? According to the Ishmael, in a case where the mazik's where the mazik's land is equivalent to the nizak's lowest land, so that the Oraita law is that the mazik only has to pay the highest quality of the nizak's land, and that's his lowest quality. And so that explains that, yes, Rava is consistent in this case too, assuming that we go by the Bishmael. This is following the Bishmael. It still follows the principle of Rava. For orphans, we revert to the Doraita law. Okay, another challenge. Ini v'hatana Rabbi Eliezer nayota'a en nifra'in min nechsei yatomim ela min haziburit v'afilu hen idit. May afilu hen idit lava fagav dichtib idit bishtara. So we have another braita, this Eliezer nayota'a, that orphans have to pay only from ziburit, even if it's idit. It's a bit unclear what that language means, so we explain it. What does that mean, even if it's idit? What is idit? Doesn't it mean even if you stipulate that the borrower has to pay from his best land? Even if you stipulate like that, orphans only have to pay ziburit. So this is clearly the first two opinions and a challenge to Rava. So we answer for Rava, la ma'idit shefa'e idit ke de Rava. No, the idit here is referring to strips, small strips of high quality land. These strips are so small and thin that you can't really use them, even though the soil is good soil, but because they're so thin and small and all the way on the side, so they're really not usable, and therefore they're actually worth less than ziburit. And Rava already spoke about the nature of these shefa'e idit. Amar Rava, hizik ziburit goveh min ha'idit, shefa'e idit goveh min ha'benonit. Who said, in a general case, if you have, if someone caused damages to ziburit, to lowest level land, then he can collect from idit. That's the law of damages. Damager always has to pay idit. If he caused damage to the strips of idit, then he doesn't have to. Even the damager, who always has to pay idit, can pay benonit because he did damage to these strips, and these strips are even lower than ziburit. And so therefore we treat the payment even lower, even though it's in mazik. Well, mazik always has to pay idit, here only benonit. So we see that shefei idit is lower even than ziburit. And so that's what this case was talking about, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer said. His point was precisely what is consistent with Rava, that orphans only have to pay from lowest level land, ziburit, and they can even pay with idit, meaning strips of land of idit. They can use that to pay back something, because that was the original deoraita law, that when you pay back a loan, really it could have been ziburit, and ziburit includes also the low level strips of idit land, and so that goes back to the deoraita law, and Rava is able to defend himself against all these attacks, and his logic stands that the Oraita for orphans is not that the orphans always pay ziburit. Orphans always pay the Oraita status, the original Oraita law. All right, next case. En nifra'in min nechsei yatomim ela min haziburit. Now we've already been talking about this, but now we're going to focus on that clause of the Mishnah itself, that orphans only pay from the lowest quality land. Ba'edav achtevoy bar ameh. Yotomim shamru ketanim or afilu gedolim. When we say orphans, does that mean orphans who are minors, or even if they're adults? Right? There's adult orphans too. If a father dies when he's of old age, the sons are already adults. The sons might be 60 years old if the father was 80 or 90. So does that apply also to them? So here's the two sides of it. Takantahi da'avud rabanan gabe yatmeh. Liktanim avud rabanan, likdolim la'avud rabanan. This is a takana on behalf of minor orphans, because minor orphans, we care about their property. They're not, since they're kids, they're not gonna be aware and responsible to make sure that they're doing everything in their own interest, and therefore we protect their interests. They say, listen, these poor orphans, if they have to pay something, then they only have to pay from the lowest quality land. That way, we as a community, as a bet din, we want to protect the assets of orphans. It doesn't mean they never have to pay anything, because the father owed money and things, so the orphans are responsible. The estate is responsible, but we protect them by saying, yeah, pay, but only from the lowest quality. That makes sense if it's minors. If they're adults, well, the adults are fully responsible for themselves, and they can take care of themselves. We don't have to protect them. And so if they're adults, then let them pay benonit or idit in whatever appropriate case, the same as everybody else. That's one side. Or dilma mishum de la masik adata de malve demit love venafle nichse kame yatme tavale noel delit hilkach afilu gedolim name. Or on the other side, we could say that the reason we just said that the original Doraita law for loans is that a lender can collect only from ziburit, the lowest quality. But we made a takana, we want to make loans more available, we want to encourage lenders, so to encourage lenders, we say that borrowers have to pay from benonit. Now that lenders are usually assuming that the borrower himself is going to be alive at the time of the loan. And so even though down on page 20 in small letters it says, oh, listen, if this borrower should die, the orphans are only going to pay from ziburit. So that's not going to stop the lender from lending, right? He's not thinking about that far off case. So, or do we say in this scenario that because it will not enter into the mind of the lender that the borrower is going to die and the orphans are going to have to pay and then they're going to pay only ziburit and then he's not going to give the loan? That's an unlikely scenario. Nobody thinks about that scenario. Therefore, the orphans can be treated the same as adults. In other words, the rabbis will say, listen, all orphans pay ziburit. And that's the original Doraita law anyway, that everybody pays ziburit. And we only made a takana for regular people who are alive that they pay benonit, because that will encourage the lenders to give out loans. Okay, it's sufficient to encourage them to give out loans to make the takana for borrowers themselves when they're alive. There's no need to change the law for orphans who are adults. And therefore, all orphans, whether they're adults or children, pay ziburit for loans. That's the other side of the law. And so now we'll try to prove one way or the other. Tashema detane Abaye keshisha yotomin she'amiru gedolim ve'en tzarich lomar ketanim. So here we have an explicit statement by the elder Abaye. This is a second generation Amora, distinguished from the usual Abaye, who's fourth generation. And he says that orphans that they speak about in the Mishnah is adults. And of course, children. So yes, even orphan adults only have to pay ziburit. But then we challenge, Dilma hanemile inyan shibu'a tegadol b'mile de'abu kekatan dameh aval inyan ziburit la. We don't know the full context of what he said that. Maybe he only said that in the context of taking a vow. There's a general law that if someone wants to collect a loan from orphans, a loan that they took out from the father owed, but then died, then the one who collects the loan has to make a vow, even if he has a loan document. Now, if the father was alive and the lender produces a loan document, then the lender does not have to vow. He has a loan document. You better pay up. But if that father died and the orphans are there, the orphans don't know all the details of their father's business dealings, and they're not sure. Maybe the father paid it in full. Maybe he paid it partially. Who knows what happened? Maybe he gave over a pledge. And so in order to protect the funds of orphans who don't know if the father paid or not, we say the lender has to make a shivu'ah. This maybe so when Abaye Kishisha said it includes adults, maybe that was only regarding vows, because even adults don't know the details of their father's business. But regarding payment of land, and the type of land for ziburit, maybe we only protect the land of minors. But for adults, they should have to pay benonit like everybody else. And so this is not necessarily a proof, but we jump to the final bottom line. Hilcheta yetomim shamru gedolim and tzarich lemar ketanim ben lishboa ben liziburit halacha. That is that the orphans that they spoke about in the Mishnah includes adults and, of course, minors, and that's true regarding the application of making a vow, and for paying with ziburit, even adult orphans only have to pay the ziburit. And this all makes sense because we're reverting to the original Doraita law, which is that borrowers can pay with ziburit land, and they only made the takana so that lenders will make loans more available. But it's sufficient for the takana if they make the takana that the father himself, the borrower himself, has to pay from his benonit land. There's no need to extend the takana to orphans, which is an unusual case. Okay, and now we come to the next section of the Mishnah. En nifra'in minechasim meshubadim b'makom sheyesh bene horin. The law is that if, let's say, I owe you money and from a loan, and I have property, so then you only have a right to collect property that I currently have. You do have no right to go collect from property that I sold. The reason this is a takana is to protect buyers of land. We want land to be, a healthy economy, and that includes people being able to buy land securely and not think that I'm going to buy land, pay $1 million, and then there's going to turn out this land was mortgaged and I'm going to have to give up the land. So this is why nowadays we have title insurance. So that way I know if I'm paying $1 million for a piece of land, then the title is secured. If some bank comes and says, 100 years ago we had a lien on this property, or some other buyer was a owner, I don't have to worry about it. The title insurance company will take care of it for me. So this is an important thing for an economy, and therefore, although sometimes if, let's say again, I'm the borrower, and I have no money, no property, then the lender can go, if he has a prior lien, his lien is before I sold it to that third party. If he has a prior lien, then yes, you're right, that is the law. He can go and collect it. But we'd like to minimize it, and therefore, if I do have land, then you have no right to go and collect land that I sold. That's the Mishnah. Question. Okay, this law applies when I sold the land to someone else because we want to protect buyers. But what if I gifted a piece of land to someone else and I also have other land? Maybe a gift is different from a sale. On the one hand, maybe the rabbis only made this takana to protect buyers of land, but receivers of a gift where they have no loss, maybe not. Maybe you as the lender can come and say, listen, I want to collect land, and maybe I only have ziburit land on hand, and I gave a gift of benonit land to someone else. So maybe on this side of the equation, the lender can come and say, I want to collect from benonit land. You don't have any. I'm going to go get it from the receiver of the gift. And maybe the rabbis will say that's fine because there's no need to protect receivers of gifts, right? Because that's not in the public interest. There's no loss, right? They just had to they received a gift, and now come and says, sorry, that gift was in error because this is benonit land, and I have a prior lien on it, so I am taking it. And there's no need to make a takana. Or do we say, there's no such thing as really a free gift. If I'm giving that guy a gift, it's because he did something for me. He did me a favor, I'm doing him a favor, but it's really a kind of a barter. And if there was not some benefit, then I would not have given him a gift. And therefore, there is a loss to that guy, right? He says, I did this guy a big favor. He gave me this gift. And now I lost out on that gift that was actually something that was in a way something he deserved, that he was owed to him. And therefore, since there is a loss, we apply the takana also for a gift, so that if I have ziburit land on hand and I gave a gift of benonit land to someone else, and now you come to collect your loan, you can only collect from my ziburit land, and you cannot go after not the buyer and not the gift recipient. That's this side of the equation. Let's see if we can prove it. Here I have an answer from this Braita, also found as a Tosefta and Baba Batra. Shechib Mera, Shamar tenu 200 zuz לפלוני, ו300 לפלוני, ו400 לפלוני, אין אומרים כל הקודם בשטר זכה, לפיכך יעשה עליו שטר חוב גובה מכולן. Someone is on his deathbed, and anything someone says on his deathbed, it's as if it's written, and we follow through with it. And he says, I want you to give 200 coins to Mr. A, and 300 coins to Mr. B, and 400 coins to Mr. C. We do not say that whoever is earlier in the deed, now here there's no actual deed, so he didn't write it, he said it. But what usually happens is that the guy on his deathbed says it, someone who's there will write it down. So it's kind of like a deed, so we call it a shtat anyway. So here in this case, we do not say whoever was mentioned first, Mr. A, before Mr. B, that he gets his money first, and therefore it's going to be paid by the last guy. No, we do not say that, because he didn't give an order, he just gave an order, because you have to say things in order. Just that's the consequence of time being linear. But he didn't mean that Mr. A has a prior right over his gift before Mr. B, and therefore, if someone should come and say, I have a prior lien, right, before you guys all got this gift, I had a lien on that land, so that lien holder collects from all of them equally, right? If that lien holder was had to be paid 100, so each of these three will have to pay 33. They're going to share it equally because they all have an equal claim, since he gave them this gift all at the same time, and without, even though he said A before B before C, but he didn't specify that it has to be in that order. He was just saying, yeah, everybody gets. Okay, that is not relevant. The second part is relevant to us. Aval, im amar, תנו 200 זוז לפלוני, ואחריו לפלוני, ואחריו לפלוני, אומרים כל הקודם בשטר זכה, לפיכך יעשה עליו שטר חוב גובה מן האחרון, אין לו גובה מי שלפניו, אין לו גובה מי שלפני פניו. If the guy in his deathbed said, give 200 to Mr. A, and after that give 300 to Mr. B, and after that he said, after that give 400 to Mr. C, then we say whoever is mentioned earlier in the document that we will write once he says that on his deathbed, whoever is mentioned first gets his land first, gets that gift first. So we have a time period. Let's say Mr. A receives his 200. At that point, he got the 200, but now there's still left over other money that is still in the hands of the owner or of the estate. And that's still free money until the second one gets paid, and so on. Therefore, if you have someone that has a promissory note and he wants to come get paid, he will get paid from the last Mr. C first, because there was a certain point of time when A and B's property was already given to them, and C was free. So since he was the last one to get it, he pays. And now, if there's not enough money in Mr. C's gift, then we'll go back to Mr. B. And if there's not enough in Mr. B, then we'll go back to Mr. A. And so that's the law. Now, that's the baraita. Let's see how we prove from here. V'afagav dekama benonit ubatra ziburit mi ziburit gabe mi benonit lagabe shema mina bematana name abud rabanan takanta. And now this second law here is going to apply. Let's say it's not money, but rather he said give 200 zuz worth of land to Mr. A. He's giving out gifts of land. Now, in this case, even though Mr. A got Benonit land, and let's say Mr. C got Ziburit land, nevertheless, it says you don't go by the land. It doesn't mention anything about the type of land here in this baraita. He will still get from Mr. C. Why? Because we went in order, and Mr. A got the land as a gift, and so that was done in the morning. And then at that time, the owner or his estate still had on hand Ziburit land. So that at that point, it's still around. And therefore, when the lien holder comes, he can take only from what's on hand. Then there was a point in time in which this ziburit was on hand. He can only take what's on hand and has no right to go and collect from something that was given as a gift. What do we see from here? That the takana of the rabbis applies not only to land that was sold to protect buyers, but also in land that was given as a gift, and it protects receivers of gifts, because they also would incur a loss should they have to give up the gift. And therefore, the collector can only collect from the ziburit, which was the last thing that the owner had on hand. All right, that seems to be a proof that yes, the takana applies to gifts as well. But then we say not necessarily. No, maybe we're talking about not a case of where the guy in the deathbed is giving out gifts, but maybe he's repaying loans, and that would be the same as a sale, because the guy's being repaid a loan, so there would be a loss if you take the land from him. Wait, tenu kamar, tenu behobi. Wait a second, the Baraita says give. Usually tenu give means a gift. This is not necessarily. It could mean give as a payment for my debt. Okay? If all these people have debts, right? So now we have Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C are all lenders that are collecting back their money, and now a new lender comes and says, wait, I have a loan, I have a lien on that. In the case like that, it doesn't matter who received that land first. All that matters is who had a lien first, right? Whose document, which loan originated earliest. And so you'd go in that order. If Mr. B, his loan, let's say, was from last year, and Mr. A, his loan was from 10 months ago, and Mr. D, the new guy who comes, his loan is from 6 months ago. You just go in order of the lien, right? Whoever has an earlier lien gets the money. And so you wouldn't go in any order. You wouldn't go in the order that he paid back the loans. So we answer, deleka shetara. We're talking about a case where there is no loan document. A, B, and C don't have loan documents, so that they can't prove the date of their lien. Hold on, it says whoever has the earliest note. Doesn't mean that the earliest promissory note, so they do have their original deeds. We say no, bishtar pekadata. It's talking about the testamentary deed, which is how we understood it in the first place. It's talking about after on the deathbed, he says, give this to A, and then to B, and then to C, then we write it down. So it's basically a last will and testament that they write down. That's what we're talking about, whoever's first in that document, but they don't actually have documents. All that is one answer to say that we have no proof from this baraita, but we have two more possible explanations also to say that there's not necessarily a proof. Could be that this case is not talking about where he's paying back loans. He is in fact giving out gifts. But when it says in the sefa of the baraita that he collects from only the last guy, Mr. C, it doesn't really mean that. Really, he will collect from whoever has Benonit. And if Mr. A has Benonit, then the last guy, the Mr. D who comes, he can collect from the Benonit. The thing is that Mr. A can then go to Mr. B, who will go to Mr. C to reclaim their loss. Since Mr. A was paid first, was given a gift first, so his gift is prior to that of B, which is prior to that of C. And so who will end up losing out? Only the last guy. So it's not that the last guy pays. Really, Mr. A might pay if he has benonit, but he will receive then the ziburit land that belonged to Mr. C. So only the last guy loses out. That's what the Mishnah, the Baraita really means. And the third answer, or we're talking about a case where they all got equal land. If they all have ziburit land, in that case, that last lender comes and takes from Mr. C because they all have the same type of land, so there's no reason to go back to Mr. A. But maybe in fact if Mr. A had benonit and the other two guys had ziburit, then he would collect from Mr. A, and that would show that the takana only applies to buyers. If there's a buyer, then the buyer, we want to protect him, and he keeps his benonit land, and you can only cannot take from it. But in the case of a gift, someone who gives gifts, then maybe indeed you can go and collect from someone who has benonit land and received it from me as a gift, even if I still have on hand ziburit. You can go and collect from that. And so we can interpret this baraita in both ways, that the takana applies to the matana case or it does not apply to the matana case. And so we have no proof from this baraita. We now move on to the next clause of the Mishnah that said, En motzi'in achilat perot. This was a case where I steal your land. I just go and take it, and then I sell it to some other guy, third party. Now, this was never really mine to sell, and therefore, you can go and get your land back from that guy. Now, after you do that, the buyer has a right to collect money from me because he paid me money, and the sale was not good because he lost the land, so he can come and take and get the price from me. In that case, he can even take from land that I owned and sold. If I owned it and sold it after, he has a prior claim to that land. Okay, that's the simple case. Here's the complication. If, in the meantime, while the buyer had it, he had it for some months, and he put money into it, invested it, improved it, and produced fruit, he also has a right, and then let's say that fruit you went and took, he has a right, that buyer has a right to the fruit and to get paid back for the investment that he made into the land. And he has to, I owe him for that as well. However, for that, he cannot take from land that I sold. That does not create a lien on any of my property. I only have to pay him back from movable items. Why? Is what we're asking, my tama. What's the difference between the price of the land that he can take from my lien property and other things that he cannot? Because that produce is not written in the deed of sale. When we write a deed of sale, right, look at the small print. It says, should this land be repossessed for any reason, because there's a prior creditor, or because he really owned it and I stole it from him, or any other reason, then I will agree to pay you back the purchase price. That's written in the document, and anytime you have a loan written with a document, it creates a lien, and that's why you can go and take from my property. However, it doesn't say in the deed that if you add more, if you put in money and collect fruit, that you should be paid that. It doesn't say that in the document. Therefore, I do owe it, but it's more like an oral loan. An oral loan does not incur lien, does not make a lien, and therefore I have to pay you, but you cannot collect from land that I sold. That's the reason. Good. Challenge. Amar le Rabbi Abba le'ola. V'hamezon ha'isha banot tichman tichtivi damu v'katane en motzi'in. Hold on. We have a counterexample. Part of the ketubah stipulation is that after divorce or death of the husband, still the husband's property or his estate has to pay for feeding the wife and her daughters until such time as the wife goes and will get remarried and demands the ketubah. Now, that payment is written in the ketubah. And if it's not written in the ketubah, it's as if it's written. When the rabbis instituted the ketubah, they said, listen, whether you write the ketubah or not, whether you write the stipulations or not, it's as if they're written, because we as a Bet Din say that all marriages have to have this fundamental right to the wife. And therefore it's the same as if it's written. And yet, in that case, the Mishnah taught that the wife and the daughters can only collect from the free property and not from liened property. Why not? Why can't they go collect from liened property, since it is a written loan or a written obligation, same as a written loan? And Ula responded, when the rabbis made this takana in the first place, that everybody has to have a ketubah, and in the ketubah the man has to guarantee that he's going to feed his wife and his daughters even after the marriage ends. They made the takana only for unsold property, but they never made it that there should be a lien on property that he already sold. So that's just part of the original takana, even though it's written in the document or as if it's written in the ketubah. It doesn't matter, because that was the takana. And all that we repeat. V'chen amar Rabbi Aseh, amar Rabbi Yochanan, lefi she'en ketubin. Rabbi Yochanan also explained that Mishnah is because it's written in a document that says if the land is repossessed from the buyer because I stole it or because he has a prior lien, then I will pay you back for the sale price. That's written in the document and therefore creates a lien on my property. Amar leRabbi Zera l'Rav Aseh, v'hamezon isha v'banot keman dekatibi damu v'katana en mosin. Same question. What about the payment for food for a wife and daughters? That it's like it's written, and yet that is not paid from lien property. Amar le mikara hachiaktun ketubin hen etzel b'nechorin ve'en ketubin hen etzel meshubadin. And he responded, it's the same conversation as before, same answer, that the rabbis, when they made the takana in the first place, it was only that the husband and his estate have to pay from free property, and they never made it made the takana for lien property, even though it's written in a ketubah or like it's written in a ketubah. Nevertheless, he doesn't have to, and that's the distinction. Tomorrow we'll see yet another possible answer to this question. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.